think the recording is on now. All right. Yeah, so so I guess today we'll take up 3 presentations on the adversary bounds. But before we get to that, so as usual, I kind of want to ask you all if you have any feedback on the notes or on the video that I posted. So, well, let's start with that, and then I'll say a few words about the project.
So at least for me, sometimes the notes were a little bit difficult to understand in terms of like the words describing a graph. It may be helpful to have like a pictorial representation of what the graphs look like.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
Not for this time. This is just feedback for future iterations more than anything.
All right. Yeah. Thanks.
Otherwise, they were good and understandable. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I thought the video was very helpful. When I first was trying to read the notes, I was kind of confused because the definition of the in the notes you introduced the adversary bound definition before the graphs part, and so it was hard to like digest all of that. Whereas in your lecture, you brought up the graphs first, so it kind of gave like a better framework, I think, for digesting it.
Okay. Okay. I'm just jotting this down. Okay, thanks. So thanks both of you. Yeah, sounds good. So Lane, I did have more pictures in the video, but of course I've posted the video relatively late. So I guess it doesn't help if you were reading the notes before the video was posted.
Yeah, I also tend to read the notes instead because I learn better that way.
Yeah, of course, sure. It's up to you. But just if you did want to see that, then it is there now. So I mean, up to you for whether you want to go back and look at it. But yeah, thanks for the feedback. So I'll consider adding some pictures to the notes as well in the future.
And what's it called? I was glad you had an example where was it L and L prime were not both 1, because in almost every case that I've dealt with or considered, it's always been 1 for both. So was it example 4 in the notes was helpful for that.
Okay. Okay. I'm just jotting this down. All right, thanks. Yeah, sure. So yeah, I guess maybe in the future I should be putting even more examples. Maybe that's the best way to go.
I think the amount of examples you have now, at least for me, was a good amount because it highlighted, by and large, like each different possible variation for the variables.
Okay. Okay. So.
So I think it's a good amount now.
Okay,
but obviously, if you think of more, feel free to throw them in, right?
Yeah. Well, there's a bunch more in the literature. Just a matter of like, basically, they get more complicated compared to like the insight you gain from them compared to how much background you need to understand what the problem statement is. Yeah. So yeah. Anyway. Okay. So. Yeah, I mean, one issue with the adversary bounds is that I realized when I was kind of starting to make these notes is just that the theory of them is by now so vast that it was hard to even decide what to include. And I realized at some point that I'm not going to even get to proving any of the equivalences between any of the different formulations, and not even the proof that any one of these formulations is a lower bound on quantum query complexity. And of course, there's different proofs of that because the different formulations are non-trivially equivalent. So you can prove for any one of those that it's a quantum lower bound. And that doesn't immediately prove that the rest are, unless we prove the equivalence between them. Yeah, so it's I guess kind of a mess. Yeah, so that's another thing. So if you guys feel like you want to see this proof for why the adversary bound is a lower bound in quantum query complexity, so there's several different proofs, I guess, for each of the different formulations. Yeah, it's something that. So I'm not even sure what the best source is in terms of like the most nicely written source. Of course, the original papers that came up with these different formulations have proofs in them, but they're not always like that easy to read. You know, so last time I taught a graduate class that mentioned the adversary bounds. I did have a proof that one of the forms is a lower bound on quantum query complexity. So you know, I can link to that, I guess, if anybody's interested. But it's only one of the forms, and proving the equivalence between them is, you know, it's still an extra hassle. It's you know, I think it was it in one of the assigned readings. I think it
I don't
was.
think so.
Oh.
Or was it? It was Spelek and Segedy, right?
Yeah, in I guess Spalak and Segedy did not. Yeah, I did not assign Spalak and Segedy. Never mind. So, yeah. So yeah, okay. I mean, I guess yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. The problem is that it's kind of an old paper, and I'm trying to assign kind of you know, papers on the edge of research. So, yeah.
I did have a historical question.
Mhm.
You said that Embinus kind of like introduced this effectively first in 2002, right? But then the Spelek and Segedy paper was 2006. So within those 4 years, all these other equivalent adversary methods were all developed and utilized.
So yes. So one thing to realize is that the dates. I think 2006 is like the kind of archive date for Spalak and Segedy, whereas 2002 is the journal date for Embinus. So like it was probably more like 2000 that Embinus had his like put his paper on the archive. I should look.
Yeah, it says previous version in stock 2000 or
Okay, so
STLC.
maybe even before that, in '99, it was on the archive. You know what I mean? Look, basically, there's the dates are these days kind of like off by 2 or 3 because of the delay between when you first put it online and people already start to read it, and when it finally appears in the journal. So yeah, it was a bit longer of a time span, but yeah, around 5 years or so of a mad rush where everybody is just like, aha, my version of the adversary is the most general, and kind of try to prove a different generalization. And then this paper by Spalak and Segedy was saying that all the versions are equivalent. That's only because the negative weight one wasn't yet introduced at that point, right? So it was kind of they were all equivalent before the negative weight one. Yeah, so that one appeared maybe in 2009 or so. The negative weight adversary bound.
Oh, it's 2007. It seems at least
2007
here.
already.
So I guess like the next year they noticed another option.
Yeah, okay, fine. So it's all happening pretty fast, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. Although showing that the negative adversary bound is equivalent to quantum query complexity, that was surely more like what, 2010 or something, or I guess I don't have all the dates memorized.
Is it Kimmel or a different person?
No, it was this should be this well, it was Reichardt originally, but the LMR paper that I assigned as reading is kind of a cleaner version of Reichardt's result. So Reichardt had like this 50-page thing that was kind of a mess. And then basically he joined forces with some other co-authors to kind of prove a more generalized and cleaner version of it. Yeah, so that was one of the assigned reading. I guess it was that was posted on the archive 2010. But maybe Reichardt's single author thing was 2009. So yeah, it's all happened pretty fast, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Any other comments or questions on the notes? Okay. So yeah, so I did kind of want to mention the project again. So yeah, I was hoping that, basically roughly this week, students can actually just pick projects. So you can send. Well, I prefer private Pieta posts, I think, to emails, because then I have it all in one place. It's easier to compare what other people's projects are. But if everybody can kind of send me a message on Piazza, to tell me kind of what project you want to do, or of course, if you don't know what project, then what types of topics you've liked in the course so far, and maybe I can help think of something. Although you can find any open problem is basically a project, right? So you can try to kind of find open problems either that I've mentioned in the notes or in any of the readings, or if you just like a topic and nobody's mentioned any open problems, then that's of course a good question to ask me. So yeah, you can either, it's up to you whether you want to make that public questions kind of in the thread about the project, so nobody really put anything there, or private questions. Email is also fine. It's a little easier for me if everything's up yet, so just kind of for my own management of the class. But don't worry about that. So yeah, this project needs to happen. So sooner rather than later is better. I guess maybe I will bother individuals by next week if nobody. If not everybody picks a project, basically. So if not everybody has a project by next week or so, then I'll have to bother you guys. Yeah. I did also want to post an assignment. I don't have it ready though, so I'm going to try to get it done also within the week if I can. Might take a little bit longer depending on how it goes. But I'll try to get that out, and we'll probably be due roughly before classes are over. So it won't be due during exam period like the project is. So the project you have until the end of exam period. Roughly the schedule for the classes, the project will be due at the end of exam period. However, your presentation for the project will be due roughly last week of class or so. So you'll give a presentation either the last week or second to last week or somewhere around there, which is sooner than you think. So that's kind of just in what a month and a half or something. That's pretty soon. So you got to pick a project and get started on it. What often happens in grad classes, or in the grad classes I teach, is that students give a presentation, and of course they're not finished with their project yet. And that's okay. Part of the point of having the presentation is to force you to get started, really, to force you to do kind of half the work for the project, and then you can do the other half during exam period. So that's kind of the goal, like get half of the project done by the last day of classes, last week. I mean, by the time of your presentation, it won't be the last day, but it will be kind of sometime roughly in the last week of classes. And the project itself will be due at the end of exam period. And the project itself will basically count as a final exam or final assessment for this course. Which is kind of why it's allowed to be due during exam period. So normally the university doesn't like things being due there, but for us, the project counts as a final exam. So that's why it will be due the last day of exam period. And so the assignment will be due before that. So the assignment will be due. Okay, I didn't decide exactly. I'm thinking of making it due, even a bit before, so that you're not distracted for the project presentation. But that depends on when I manage to post it. So I probably want to give you at least 2 weeks, but probably longer, like 3 to 4 weeks even, to do the assignment. It will depend on the scheduling a little bit for when I finish it and manage to post it. So I'll work on that. But I do want kind of a higher priority for me that everybody picks a project. That's kind of the main part of the class. The assignment is kind of a side note.
What what weeks will be on the assignment? Like the first half, or I mean, up until and including the adversary bound, or?
I was thinking roughly that, but since I didn't post it yet, maybe I'll come up with something to do so this week's content. This coming week, I was hoping to do quantum walks. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a good exercise in quantum walk off the top of my head, but I can try to think of something and add it in as well. Yeah. So, but yeah. Oh, by the way, so for the coming week, my plan is to not post notes and instead link to a really nice survey by Miklos Santa on quantum walks, because I think my notes will basically just be a rewriting of that. So yeah, so I just need to kind of reread it and double check that we have all the background we need and that I don't feel like adding a small note in addition myself. But I'll post that soon. So that's kind of the plan for this week. So I'll post that and then I'll do a video. Yeah, and then right, and of course we will also have 3 student presentations for next Monday. Right, so this actually, let's do that next. So does anybody want to volunteer for the student presentations on quantum walks?
I can do one.
Abhishek? Yeah. Okay. Right.
Have you started repeating? Oh yeah, Yuming is doing one today, right?
So, yeah, we started repeating. Not everybody did the first one though, so we should probably. Well, yeah, I'll put you down, Abhishek. Yeah, I'll put you down. So there are a few people that didn't do their first one yet, and we should probably make sure that they do so that they don't have to do kind of 2 in 1 week by the same person. Yeah, I mean, I suppose not the end of the world, but it can be a little awkward for time management reasons for the student. But yes, we have. I mean, we have started. Yuming is presenting again today because he volunteered to. Yeah, so I'll put you down for next week for the 29th. Sorry, it's not a leap year, so it's already March 1st, I guess. Yeah, March 1st. Okay, so right, anyone else?
What topic might be the week after?
Oh, yeah, so it's a good question. So I've kind of, as I was saying, there's a few options for how to structure the rest of the course. So we can either, so I feel like we're kind of missing some. I kind of want to do a week on just general quantum query or communication results, like the largest possible known separations between randomized and quantum query complexities for partial functions and total functions. And there's some work in that direction. And because the class is kind of called quantum query and communication complexity, I feel like we should probably cover these. So these are not technique focused, but just final result focused for what is the largest thing that we've achieved. So I think we probably want to do 1 week on that at some point. And then there's some communication complexity topics that I wanted to cover for sure. So,
then I'm fine with volunteering for next week as well.
Okay. Yeah, and then yeah, I might want to do some kind of either learning graphs or kind of that's another technique for constructing quantum algorithms, either learning graphs or primal solutions to to the negative weight adversary bound. That's another way of kind of constructing quantum algorithms without actually constructing quantum algorithms. So I might want to do either those together in one week, or or something like that. Some kind of how to make quantum algorithms without really making a quantum algorithm kind of week. So, but I feel like not everything fits. So we'll have to see. Anyway, so is your decision that you do want to do?
Yeah, I'll volunteer for next week.
Yeah, sure. So, you're doing one today, right?
Yeah. So I just want to knock them out. Unless someone else needs to, or wants to go soon.
Well, I'm going to go with the volunteers, I guess, when we can. So I think we have enough weeks that so long as I'm careful, but if nobody's going to have to do 2 in a week. So it's just going to need to be careful starting from the week after next. Okay, anyone else? All right, so for the third one, I'll pick at random and well, okay, I'll ask for volunteers on Piazza first because I guess that worked last time. Yuming volunteered, so I'll ask on volunteers on Piazza first, and then I'll pick someone random. Right, yeah. So I guess in terms of what the readings will be, actually, I haven't picked them out yet, so I feel like I don't know that many papers that are both kind of recent on quantum walks and I feel like are important or kind of made a big contribution. So that's a bit of a barrier in terms of picking 3 of them on quantum walks, even though I think quantum walks is an important topic. It's just it's not always, not every important topic is an active topic. It was actually a bit difficult to do that for the negative weight adversary bounds as well. It's super important, but somehow a bit stagnant, even though it's kind of, so obviously everybody knows about it, everybody needs to refer to it and use it, but papers really on the adversary bounds, well, of course I picked them out, but surprisingly it wasn't that plentiful. So I think something similar is going to happen with quantum walks probably. So I'll take a look and post them hopefully tonight. Okay, so let's do the presentations. Let's see. So I'm not sure if the order matters terribly much.
Yeah, I don't mind going first, but
sorry, Joseph, was that you?
Yeah. Sorry, I said I don't mind going first since.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Okay. Go ahead then. Which paper are you presenting again? Hold on. I'm just.
I'm doing the quantum complexity of state conversion.
Right. Okay. Cool. So yeah. So let's that makes sense, I guess. So let's do that one first.
I can be the second one.
Yuming? Okay. Which one are you presenting?
Tight quantum low bound for approximate accounting with quantum states.
Okay. Sure.
And I'll go third if that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. So all right. So go ahead, Joseph, whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Yeah. Hold on,
you can.
I'm just going to share my entire screen. Let me know if that. Sorry, I'm using a new setup right now. My graphics card caught fire last week, so just trying to see if this works.
Yep.
All right, looks like my browser is crashing. I'm going to reset it and try to see if that works. I'll be right back.
All right. So I guess just maybe I'll just say in advance. So last time the presentations were running long. I do kind of want in general to restrict to around 10 minutes so that it doesn't drag out forever. It's okay to go a little bit over because people have been doing that, but I'll try to cut people off if it goes significantly over. So like surely by 15 minutes, I'll probably cut you off.
I can be the first one if Joseph needs more time.
Yeah, Joseph, are you there? Do you prefer to go second or?
If I can't get this to work now, then we can just get someone to go, but let me see if this works. Can you see this
Okay,
now?
okay.
Yeah, okay, we can see. All right, I can see at least.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't know how to get presentation. It crashed before when I tried to share my entire screen, so I'm now just sharing a tab. I don't know how to get this to show in presentation mode, so I'm just gonna go through it as is. Okay, so yeah, so the paper that I'm covering for this week is quantum query complexity of state conversion. And so just a little bit of background before we begin and discuss the actual problem. So we begin with an input alphabet K with cardinality little k, and an input set D, subset of K to the N. So some N letter inputs. And so we work over a Hilbert space H, and we fix an input set rho X indexed in our input set, and an output state as well, sigma X. And so ultimately the goal of state conversion is to characterize the complexity of converting states rho X into beginning of states rho X and converting to state sigma X in terms of the number of queries to input X. And so the problem comes in two flavors: the coherent version, where the real part, where we output a state sigma prime of X, and the coherent condition simply requires that the inner product of sigma prime of X with sigma X tensor a workspace bit is greater than or equal to the root of 1 minus epsilon. And we have the non-coherent version where we have the inner product of sigma prime of X with state sigma X, and we allow some extra results in the workspace area, and that norm is greater than or equal to root of 1 minus epsilon. So now one of the key tools that we use to characterize complexity in this case is the gamma 2 norm. So in general, we have a matrix A, which is D1 by D2, with index that's D1 by D2. And the norm is just given by the maximum over matrix of the operator norm of the Hadamard product of A with M, such that the norm of M is less than or equal to 1. So that's the compact definition. The definition that he actually uses in the paper for the proof is given as a minimization problem over natural numbers M and vectors from Cm. And this just maximizes the square norm of choices of vectors Ux and Vy for input values X and Y, subject to the constraint that the inner product of Ux with Uy is equal to the entry of A at point XY. A slightly more useful version of this norm, though, is given by fixing a particular choice of matrices Z1 through ZL. And so then the filtered norm is just the max over matrices M of the Hadamard product of A with M, where the maximum over all choices of matrices Zj is bounded above by 1. The norm of the Hadamard product of Zj with M is at most 1. And this can again be rephrased as a minimization, as an optimization problem, where now you make choices of vectors Uxj and Vyj for each matrix J. And once again, you're maximizing the sum of the square norms of these vectors, subject to the additional constraints that you now have that the entries of A at each point xy is given by this weighted sum according to the entries of each matrix Zj. And so a common choice of this is to just weigh the entries by whether or not input X and input Y agree on entry J. And so this is nice because this turns out to be a nice semi-definite program, as we'll discuss later. And so on to the main results. So essentially their goal with this paper is to characterize the query complexity of both the coherent and the non-coherent state conversion problem in terms of what he refers to as the query distance between the gram matrices of row of the input states and output states. So just represented by the inner product of either the input or the output state at input xy. And so ultimately their results are summarized in theorem 4.9 for the so-called bounded error state conversion form. And so so it's characterized in terms of these values Q delta for rho and sigma, which is just the minimum over all positive semi-definite states sigma prime that are within gamma 2 distance at most delta of sigma, and so it just minimizes the gamma 2 norm of the query distance between rho and these sigma primes. And once again, for the non-coherent version, you are allowed a modification to the distance by some positive semi-definite matrix S. And so he gives these bounds for the query complexity, which summarizes the results that I'm going to get into now. So, so the first job is to establish an upper bound for this query complexity. And so that's given in theorem 4.1, where we fix some error at most equal to the query distance between rho and sigma. And so ultimately the result shows that query complexity is upper bounded by the norm, the query distance multiplied by, and on order 1 over epsilon squared log 1 over epsilon. And the proof is simply to construct an algorithm for state conversion. And so the main tool for that is this phase detection algorithm, which has a complex statement, but ultimately the idea is that given some B workspace bits, we can produce for any unitary operator on H a circuit that essentially for any eigenvector with phase 0, it will just fix that eigenvector. And for any eigenvector with phase at least big theta, it will roughly flip the eigenvector. So that's essentially all you need to know from that. And so the actual construction of the algorithm, so we just let M and these vectors uxj and uxj and vxj just be vectors that satisfy the minimum program for the definition of the filtered gamma norm. Then we construct these additional vectors mu I and nu I according to a technical lemma. And so they work over this slightly expanded Hilbert space W. And so they construct these vectors Tx plus or minus. So Tx is just constructed from the input and output vectors. And these psi of x's are constructed from these additional vectors that I mentioned here. And in addition, they construct these operators pi x, which is just the identity minus the tensor product of projections onto the states given here. And lambda is a projection onto the orthogonal complement of the span of the psi x's. And so the actual algorithm itself, so we fix theta and delta. So theta is epsilon over the query distance, and delta is simply equal to epsilon, or some choice of epsilon. And so on input x, we construct this operator ux, and we can then construct the phase detection circuit for ux, and then we return the action of that circuit on the state rho x and some work bits. And so the key idea of the algorithm is that the start state can be written in terms of Tx plus and Tx minus, and through a series of technical lemmas. So lemma 4.4 argues that Tx plus has large component in the phase 0 eigenspace of ux, and lemma 4.5 says that Tx minus has a very small component with phase less than epsilon. So roughly what we can expect is that this action on the starting vector rho x roughly converts it to sigma x based on simple algebraic relation. And so the query complexity comes primarily from the cost to compute the action of this reflection 2 pi x minus I. And so it can be done in roughly the query distance times order 1 over epsilon squared times log 1 over epsilon. And so from there, so this is obviously an adversary bound paper. So one of the key corollaries that he has from that is to actually establish a characterization of the general adversary bound for any function f. So we fix any finite set E and let f be a map from D to E. And so the general adversary bound can be defined. So we fix this matrix F such that f of xy is equal to just the Kronecker delta of f of x and f of y. So whether or not they agree. And so then the adversary bound can be written as a semi-definite program, maximizing the norm of gamma, where gamma is a real symmetric matrix whose Hadamard product with f is 0, and such that the norm of gamma with whose Hadamard product with the matrices delta j is at most 1. And so, as he notes, the state conversion problem itself generalizes function evaluation. And so what he does is he combines the bounds we obtain for the state conversion problem together with a technical lemma that characterizes that essentially bounds the semi-definite program for the adversary bound in terms of the semi-definite program defining the gamma 2 norm for appropriate for the matrix F. And so what he does is what that technical lemma does is essentially state that the query complexity of any function f whatsoever is essentially the adversary bound, the general adversary bound. And then finally, they show some nice properties. So they show that, for example, the adversary bound is multiplicative under an appropriate notion of function composition for section 5. And so that roughly covers the main ideas of the paper.
All right, thanks. Yeah, so any questions for Joseph? Right, so let me just say a few words on this paper. So of course, this paper is the one that's usually cited for showing that the negative weight adversary bound is tight for quantum query complexity. That is, that you can convert a negative weight adversary bound into a quantum algorithm, giving basically an upper bound and not just a lower bound on quantum algorithms. So it's not the first paper that did this, because Reichardt had such a paper before, at first off by log factors and then kind of a fixed version that's not. So kind of they want to justify why they're having a new paper with more authors, and in part it's just because their version is kind of simpler and cleaner. But to really sell the point, to try to get it to be a real paper, then they generalize. So instead of just talking about Boolean functions, they talk about this state conversion business. So what is state conversion? Well, okay, it doesn't matter exactly, I guess. Of course, Joseph explained, but it's just think of it as a generalization of computing a function, where instead of just, well, how would you generalize computing a function? You're reading this string, that's the input string. And okay, you can say, all right, well, maybe instead of just a 0-1 output, then I'll have, like instead of just a 0-1 question, a Boolean question about this input string, I have a non-Boolean question, right? I have more outputs. That's one way to generalize it. And you can say, okay, the input string is not Boolean alphabet either. But you can generalize further. You can say, all right, maybe instead of saying that you're computing some function, you're going to perform some operation. So here now, if you have your input string and you have a starting state, and depending on what the input string is, you want to kind of convert this state into a target state. So you want to apply some operation on this state. So this is more or less the state conversion problem. And so, when you start doing that, then there starts to be this question of coherent versus incoherent conversion. I mean, when you convert quantum states, do you allow kind of garbage on the side, or do you want to just like a clean conversion where you kind of uncomputed all the garbage and it's just you start from a pure state, you end up with a pure state, and you're done. So there's that technicality. So yeah, and they basically say that that this general negative weight adversary bound characterizes even the state conversion problem, and then the characterization is in terms of these difference in gram matrices. This is like the matrix of the gram matrix is the matrix of inner product. So if you take the gram matrix you start with and the target gram matrix you want to end up with, and you kind of take their difference, then that kind of could be used to characterize you can basically have a negative weighted adversary bound that applies to that difference in gram matrices. And their kind of more generalized version of the negative weighted adversary bound is called the filtered gamma 2 norm. And this mathematical object is related to the regular gamma 2 norm, which of course we didn't cover yet in this class, which makes this whole thing a bit difficult to read. But I believe, if I plan to cover it in, because the regular gamma 2 norm, not even the filtered gamma 2 norm, just a gamma 2 norm as a norm of matrices, is relevant for communication complexity for quantum lower bounds. So it kind of comes up in a different setting in communication complexity. So the gamma 2 norms, it's a good thing to know for this class, but we didn't cover it yet. And so it makes it a little bit hard to kind of understand the filtered gamma 2 norm, which only makes it more complicated. But just think about it as a generalization of the negative weight adversary bound, where you basically have these other settings where either you have non-Boolean inputs and outputs for the function, but also this more general setting of state conversion instead of just function computation. Okay, any other comments or questions on this paper? Well, all right. Okay, so let's move on. I guess yeah, I mean I could talk about it more, but I think it's we should probably try to minimize the amount by which we go over time. So who wanted to go next? Sorry, Yuming, I think.
Yeah. Let me share the screen.
Yeah, share your screen.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, assuming your screen. Okay. Yeah, now I can see it. So hopefully, okay. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, let's get started. I did approximate counting in my first presentation, and now I'm doing it again in this presentation. So let me remind you what is approximate counting. Given n items and a subset x is marked, your task is to compute the size of x with multiplicative error epsilon. And we already know that an optimal quantum query complexity needs to take this many queries to count the size of x. And in this paper, we consider a decision version of approximate counting, our task is to distinguish whether an input set X has size K or 1 plus epsilon times K. And this decision version looks no difference from the original one, but there is a little more here. So the original approximate counting, the original quantum query setting allow us to access to membership oracle, which means, okay, given an I, the oracle will tell you whether I is in the X or not in X. But now consider the algorithm have access to psi X. What is psi X? Psi X is the uniform superposition over all those marked elements. So in the Euro definition of quantum query model, we have a membership oracle, and sometimes we start from an initial state, which is the uniform superposition over all elements. But now the algorithm can have access to the state, which is uniform superposition over those marked elements. So what do we mean by having access to psi X? Well, it can have several different types of this scenario. So first, the algorithm can have copies of psi X. And second, the algorithm may have the reflecting oracle, which means the algorithm have a unitary, black box unitary, which can reflect a state about psi X. And third, the algorithm can have the state generating oracle, which means you can have OX maps initial state to your psi X. Well, although these are three different types of accessing to psi X, but as you can see, if you have a state generating oracle, you use it once, then you can get a copy of psi X. You use it twice, you can get an implement of the reflecting oracle. So basically now we have four scenarios. You can have membership oracle, you can have copies of psi X, you can have the reflecting oracle, you can have the state generating oracle. So the main result of this paper give us the quantum query complexity in these four different scenarios. If you only have copies of say psi X, then algorithm should at least use the psi X those times. And if you have say the generating oracle, then you need to query the oracle this many times, and so on. So this is a main result of this. And this one is what we already know. Okay, and I will only give a highly intuitive summary of the proof of the theorem. So as Joseph told us, the filtered gamma-2 norm, or here I call it a relative gamma-2 norm, is related to the adversary bound. So we can use a relative gamma-2 norm to evaluate adversary bound. And here, gamma-2 A delta, informally speaking, this matrix A tell us what task we should do. Like in Joseph's talk, the task is state conversion. So A is basically the state rho minus state sigma. And here, informally speaking, delta encodes which oracle we use. And to evaluate the relative gamma-2 norm, we look at the dual version of this norm. The value of gamma-2 is equal to the value of the following optimization problem. We introduce a new matrix gamma, and the value of maximal, the norm of gamma product A subject to this constraint is the value of gamma-2. And so, for any Fishball gamma, we can compute a lower bound for gamma-2. And the representation theory of symmetric groups will help us construct such gamma. And such gamma give us the evaluation on gamma-2 and Gamma 2 give us the quantum query complexity in different scenarios. Okay. Yeah, that's all I want to talk. Is it clear?
Okay, thanks. Maybe put your slide back up just so that we can look at it. Or
Sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, I should share my screen again. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's all right. Yeah. I guess does anybody have any questions for Yuming or on comments on the paper?
So I guess from the perspective of the question they pose, why is the reflecting oracle a meaningful resource that we should care about? Like, is it because it's related to the Grover algorithm, or like?
Well, actually, I'm not sure why it is important to look at reflecting oracle. Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like is it true that the relative gamma 2 norm has something to do with this reflecting process?
Well, so a reflecting oracle is kind of a common. Well, okay, so yeah, it's kind of just a common operation to ask for in general because many algorithms use it. So it just feels like a slightly stronger setting than just being given copies of the state. Being given copies of the state is in general a little bit weird because we're used to kind of being able to do reversible operations and when we do quantum computing, and so if we're just giving copies, then of course we can't uncompute the copies in any sense. It's common to consider a slightly more general setting where either you can reflect about the state, or else something given to be given something that prepares the state. So usually, kind of you might imagine that if you're given a coherent quantum state, then maybe it's the reason you have it is because you kind of had access to a process that generates it, and then in that case you can reverse that process as well and kind of uncompute the state. So I don't really I don't really know exactly what to say except that it's kind of a common. It's common to consider it. I think in part because it feels like the minimal resource that still lets a bunch of quantum algorithms such as Grover search work. So it's kind of it feels eventually it starts to feel like a sort of a natural way of getting at a state is to kind of make this reflection oracle about it. It's kind of a more powerful way of it's more powerful than just being given copies, which usually doesn't let you do all that much. The main thing you can do with copies of the state is measure them in some basis, I guess. But kind of, it's less powerful than an oracle that just lets you prepare coherent copies of the state. So yeah, I'm not sure what to say about it exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, I'll say a few things if nobody else has any. Yeah, well, okay, so I mean, I guess this paper is sort of a follow-up on. So we took up a paper. Well, you took up a paper on approximate counting using these Laurent polynomials. This was the polynomial method, and there's these Laurent
Yeah.
that had 1 over x and 1 over x squared kind of terms in them.
Right.
Right, and then they kind of proved lower bounds on this setting where, you're doing approximate counting. You want to know roughly how many ones there are in this Boolean string, but instead of only being given oracle access to the Boolean string, you're also given uniform superpositions over all the ones. So you're given these special states that have a uniform superposition over the ones. But of course that doesn't. If you're given too few such states, it doesn't let you count how many ones there are, at least intuitively. So you want a lower bound that takes that into account. And they had one using the polynomial method, interestingly enough, or at least using a variant of the polynomial method that had these Laurent polynomials, right, with 1 over x terms. Yeah, and I guess so here, these authors just saw that and are like, oh, we can do this better. And then they consider these other generalizations where instead of just having normal query access to the string and also having copies of the state that's a superposition over the ones of the string, you can also consider these other, like this reflection oracle or state generation oracle to either generate this superposition or reflect about it. And they were asking kind of, can we prove a lower bound in all of these settings, basically, and even discuss trade-offs between the different resources. And they're able to do this using an adversary bound, a negative adversary bound, this gamma 2, filtered gamma 2 norm, or which I guess they call a relative gamma 2 norm. So, I guess what's going on here is that they sort of are using a generalization of the negative weighted adversary bound, not just to state conversion, but even further. So this is very generalized version of the adversary bound that was kind of, I guess, introduced in a paper or two by Alexander Belovs, I believe. So anyway, so the adversary bound has these generalizations to all sorts of other settings, the negative weight one at least. And here, they use one of those, and using it involves a bunch of representation theory. So it's kind of scary to read. This is just generally a property of the negative adversary bound. Even using it in relatively simple cases ends up being very difficult mathematically. But kind of here they have a relatively simple function to compute. I mean, this approximate counting business is not like it's a symmetric function. It's like just overall, it's kind of fairly simple function. The main complication is that they have all these resources they want to handle, and it turns out this is a good time to bring in these vast generalizations of the negative weighted adversary bound. They can handle these very generalized settings, and and then you have to struggle with how to prove a negative weighted adversary lower bound, which it's not very pleasant, and they have to use a bunch of representation theory to do so. But in the end, they basically just get a stronger result than, than what you could do even with the Laurent polynomials. So they do get some payoff from all the work that they do here. All right. Any other questions? Okay, so let's proceed to the last presentation by Lane.
Okay. One second. You guys can see this?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking about provably secure key establishment against quantum adversaries. So the main thing I'll be talking about is the scenario more than focusing too heavily on the lower bound aspect. So here we've got two people, Alice and Bob, and they each have a classical computer, and they're going to establish some secret key between the two of them. And there's going to be an eavesdropper who's, in their secret key that they're going to establish is publicly communicated information is used to determine what the key is. There's going to be an eavesdropper who's going to snoop in on the information, and they can have either a classical or a quantum computer. So in the case of a classical computer, it was shown by Merkel in 74, I believe, that doing this can work perfectly fine in certain settings. But as we'll see, if the snooper has a quantum computer, it can end up causing trouble and making it no longer secure unless we utilize a new protocol. So the idea is this. We've got some function that everyone has access to, which maps some domain, let's say of size n squared, to a range of size n to the fifth, hypothetically, right? And the reason why we want this range to be much bigger is that in general, you won't have collisions on the range from different elements in the domain. So what Alice does is she computes a function on a bunch of inputs, and she sends the outputs of those evaluations to Bob, say y of the outputs, and everyone has access to what values are transmitted. Bob keeps trying random inputs to F until he obtains an element whose evaluation is equal to one of the elements, one of the values that Alice has transmitted. Once that's happened, he sends back that output. So they both know now what the input was that evaluated to that output, and that will be their secret key. Now, on the other hand, Snoop has to take that output that Bob has publicly communicated and figure out what the preimage was or what the input was in order to generate that output. And in general, this ends up taking Alice and Bob around n time in order to generate a private key, but the snooper has to take around n squared calls to F in order to also figure out what the key is. So at least for quite a while, Alice and Bob have a pretty secure key shared between them. Now, for those who remember like Grover's algorithm, if you bring Grover into it, then the n squared time that it took for the snooper is now down to around n. So now we're no longer actually securely protected, because in roughly the same time as it takes Alice and Bob to have a secure communication and private key, the snooper can also figure out what the solution is. So in general, as a summary of the scenarios that we can have, if Alice and Bob both have a classical computer and the snooper also does, the ratio and the times that it takes them to determine the secret key is n, so it's going to take the snooper a long time. And if everyone has a quantum computer, it's also around n. But if hypothetically Alice and Bob have classical computers, but some malicious hacker has somehow built a quantum computer, the ratio will be still, as per the results of this paper, at least a square root of n advantage in general, which is not super great, but it's enough to make it still secure. So how they go about this is in earlier works, it was showing that in the worst case, it was still secure, but you can't just consider the best possible choices for Alice and Bob to pick for in the domain and the range and stuff. You have to consider over many possible trials what the average complexity that it's going to take the eavesdropper to figure out the secret key. So it turns out that they generalize the adversary, the negative weight adversary bound to an average case, and they do this by relating Snoop's task to solving the hidden k-sum problem. So the hidden k-sum problem is equivalent to saying if you have the bases of some group and you want to find which of those bases need to be involved in order to generate a particular other element, and you're using at most k of those elements, what is a decomposition in that way? And so they then go ahead and relate the k-sum problem, proving a lower bound for it, and then they provide 1 second. Where is it? Oh, it's not going to show you this other screen. Okay, so anyway, they go ahead and basically modify the standard lower bound adversary method to average out over possible input values that Alice sent and values that Bob will send back, and show that on average it's still that n to the 1.5 minus epsilon difficulty for the snooper to figure out what the secret key is. And so if you utilize a quantum computer, you still won't be able to necessarily snoop in on the information. Okay, I think I'll just stop there. How do I stop?
All right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So, right. Any questions on this paper or for Lane? All right. Yeah. Well, let me say a few words on this paper. Okay. So, right. What is this paper doing exactly? So, you probably know about public key cryptography as a concept. It's kind of, I guess, it's something that is commonly taught in undergraduate classes these days. So, the cryptography of the internet is kind of based on it. So you may be familiar with the fact that we don't have any kind of provable security guarantees on public key cryptography in general. So, I mean, we can have something like RSA, and it seems to work in practice, and that nobody knows how to break it. We don't have any proof that there's no fast algorithm to break it. And of course, there is a fast quantum algorithm to break RSA. So you can come up with other proposals that implement kind of public key cryptography. Generally, you need the kind of a cryptographic primitive called a trapdoor function, and fine. So then you need to basically come up with a proposal for a trapdoor function, what's known in cryptography. And there's some versions. Some of them are conjectured to be hard even quantumly to break. So we don't know even a quantum algorithm for some of them, but there's no proof that there isn't one. So we just kind of say, all right, well, we came up with this, some 10 years ago, and in those 10 years, nobody managed to break it. So there you go. So that's all we can say. So on the other hand, there's a different kind of cryptographic primitive. This is just called a one-way function. And one-way functions, well, technically we can't prove that you can't break them either, but one-way functions just feels very plentiful. So it seems like, it's very, very easy to design a one-way function, a function that sort of behaves randomly. Like you plug in some input string and it kind of gives you a random string as output. Of course, it's deterministic. It's not random. So two people applying the function will get the same result, but it kind of feels random. Like it feels like the output string has nothing to do with the input as far as anybody can tell. So now one-way functions can be used to do cryptography if two players already share a key. So if two players share a key, then you can use one-way functions to do cryptography. Okay, but if you don't already share a key, if you want to kind of do a public key version of cryptography, one-way functions are not good enough, and you need this thing called trapdoor functions. Trapdoor functions are very hard to design. And if you want quantum secure trapdoor functions, then we have like what, like 1 or 2 proposals. So we have like very few. Now that's all in the setting where you require kind of exponential security guarantees. You want the adversary, the eavesdropper, to have to work exponentially hard in order to break your cryptography. That's all in that setting. But there's kind of a very old proposal. I think it even predates, might even predate public key cryptography. There's a very old proposal, something called Merkle games. Merkle game is basically a technique for basically doing public key crypto without sharing a key originally, using only a hash function, so only a one-way function. So if you only have to trust like, you know, SHA-256 or whatever, like some hash that nobody knows how to invert. Those are plentiful. Quantum algorithms probably don't help you. So you only have to trust that. And you can do crypto even without sharing a key in advance. So, you know, basically Lane and I can, you know, he can describe his protocol to me and I can say, okay, and then we can implement this, and everybody else can be listening to the whole process. And in the end, we share a key that none of the rest of you can share, so long as none of you pretend to be him, right? So like the key asymmetry is that he will say some things to me that he chose, and that nobody else listening can pretend to be him. So long as we have authentication, it's called. So long as we know that we are authentic, then we can share. We can create a key that we can share that nobody else will know, up to quadratic security. Okay, so the difference here is that to do this with exponential security, you need a trapdoor function. To do it with quadratic security, meaning like we will talk for n amount of time, but it will take any of you guys n squared to break it. So quadratic security we can do with just a hash function, with just a SHA-256 kind of thing. Okay, so you know, SHA-256, there's like an online website that can compute it. So I can just link it to you, and we can literally perform this right now and just have Lane and I share a key or whatever based on that, and everybody else will have, like, you know, okay, so, you know, if we have to share like 100 things with each other, then anybody else will have to try 10,000 things to plug into this online SHA-256 before they can find the key, even though Len and I only exchanged like 100 or 200 strings. Okay, fine. So here's the issue that was realized. The issue that this paper is trying to address is that, okay, so there is this notion of Merkle games. It's kind of nice. It tells you, all right, even if in the worst case scenario where there's no trapdoor functions, so long as we have like a SHA-256, we still have at least quadratic security for being able to kind of have a secure internet. Okay, it's not ideal. It's not exponential security. It's better than nothing. Okay, what is the problem though? The problem is if you have quantum computing, then basically, okay, quantum computing, of course you can use Shor's algorithm to break RSA, to break the exponential security thing. But you can use Grover's algorithm, it turns out, to break this quadratic security of the Merkle game. Okay, so you can say it's a different quantum algorithm, but it's Grover's algorithm now, and it just breaks, it does a quadratic speedup on what the adversary would have to do. So it's kind of unfortunate coincidence that quantum computing also breaks the Merkle games. And so this paper tries to fix it by coming up with a variant on the Merkle game that still only uses a hash function, only uses like a SHA-256 kind of thing. And still kind of allow Lane and I to kind of share a key that even if everybody else has quantum computing power, you know, they would have to work some polynomially large, nearly quadratically more time compared to the amount of bits that Lane and I have to exchange, or the amount of total time we have to work, basically. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of the gist of the story. And you know, their lower bound on. Okay, so to prove that they have to kind of, because of this assumption that the hash function is a one-way function, then effectively you have to make queries to it. Like, effectively, the only thing you can do with the SHA-256 function is evaluate it on strings. This is our assumption. So we're going to assume that you don't know a clever secret to how to invert SHA-256. So the only thing you can do with it is apply it. This seems to be true in practice right now, but you know, maybe someday somebody will break SHA-256, I suppose. So anyway, so once you put that assumption in place, then now you're basically in query complexity. You're just basically making queries to SHA-256. Okay, I mean, there's this aspect where Lane and I exchange bits, fine, but then the adversary saw those bits. Now the adversary is just making queries to SHA-256. This is kind of basically a query setting. And so they need a query lower bound on basically quantum protocol for finding this key, and then they end up using an adversary method to prove the query lower bound part for why no quantum adversary can manage to break this protocol. Right, and okay, so basically the kind of take-home message is a bit more of a crypto one, maybe, that you know, we're used to wanting good crypto. We are used to wanting crypto that has exponential security, but it's always on kind of shaky grounds in terms of the assumptions, in terms of public key things, at least. But a little known fact is that if worse comes to worse and we don't have trapdoor functions at all, we don't have public key crypto at all, we can still sort of make do with private key crypto with only SHA-256, only hash functions. We can sort of make do with it, you know, at least against weakish adversaries. Like, you know, if two parties communicate N to each other, then the adversary can break the whole scheme and hear everything using kind of N squared time. Not ideal, but you know, it's better than literally nothing. So you know, this paper kind of sort of gets us back to that situation, roughly speaking, which I guess quantum algorithms even broke that, because Grover search breaks Merkle games, right? So initially it would seem quantum algorithms even break the Merkle games, even break this property, as in addition to breaking RSA. But this is saying, okay, actually no, we can retain back some of this, you know, this quadratic security, or nearly this quadratic security, you know, and you still just only need some kind of SHA-256, some kind of hash function. Okay. All right. So any more questions on any of the papers, or? All right. So so just as a reminder, the projects do need to happen. If you can pick a project and kind of tell me about it, either publicly on Piazza or privately on Piazza, that would be great. You can work in teams of 2 or potentially 3. You know, although I think I want to encourage generally teams of 2. Yeah, but individual is fine as well. I know people kind of don't necessarily know each other, and it's annoying to have to kind of pick teams and work over Zoom all day. So yeah, that's up to you. You know, you can also just list the topic you're interested in and see if anybody else wants to work with you or something. But I do kind of want to get this done. So let's I'll give you guys another week to kind of do that, and then I'll start kind of bugging individuals who haven't told me what their project is. Okay. All right, so if there's nothing else, then I guess I'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
All right.